Okay, so I am Gil Cedillo. This is the special meeting of the Housing Committee. Wednesday, April 20th, 2016. We are in the John Ferraro Council Chamber Room, 340 City Hall, 1:30 p.m. I note 145, 200 North Spring Street, Los Angeles, CA 90012. Let me begin. Do you guys need to do anything? Say anything?
Item 1 is a verbal presentation from the LA Renters Coalition regarding the rent burden crisis and recommendations for the preservation of affordable housing and related matters.
So let me begin by, again, as I said outside, applauding you and your efforts and your leadership. I particularly want to commend you, although I want to also recommend, it's hot outside. And let me say one word, umbrellas, right? Or shade. But in seriousness, let me say this. And so it's hot outside. I don't know, it's 90 to 100 degrees. There's a lot of places you could be, and clearly not out in the sun, raising your voice to your government to respond to this critical issue. And yet all of you made that decision. You made the decision that we call the choice of leadership. Because you had a lot of places you could be, but you chose to be here. You chose to raise these issues before us. They are the issues of the day. They are very serious issues and deserve to be addressed in the seriousness that you, all of you in your coalition have committed yourselves to. And so I commend you for that. I could tell you my perspective on the housing crisis, and that's my job. It's what I get up every day thinking about. We do have a crisis. There's 100,000 units of housing that we need at every rate. We need market rate. We need affordable. We need affordability like today. We need special needs housing, and we've had some great ribbon cuttings recently in my district for veterans, and we have more coming. But we cannot do enough to fill this void. We cannot deny that it's related to homelessness, and that there are people who, when you're paying more than 30% of your income to stay inside to pay your rent, that you are a check away from being on the streets. And there are too many people who are on the streets because of that, and so we need to do all that we can to make sure that we have the housing that we need, and that we need it now. 60% of us are renters, including council members, as I said in the chambers earlier, and 60% of us are paying too much for that rent. And so I applaud you, and I thank you for your leadership. I really, really want to thank you for your leadership, because this is the work that many of us up here would be doing if we weren't here. And so we are happy to see you, and we look to partner with you, not only here but throughout the city as we raise this issue, because only you have the voice that can be heard to make sure that we do the things that must be done to build the housing that has to be built. So with that, I'm not going to say anything more. I want to hear from you. But before that, I want to hear from my colleagues who also have unique experiences as leaders in the community on this issue and other issues. And so, Senator, it's your deference to the Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank you for your leadership on this issue, long-time leadership on this issue, before you came to City Council, but especially on the Council. You've been a source of inspiration and leadership, and we appreciate your convening this special. Is that better? Can you hear? Okay. I was just thanking the chairman for his leadership on this issue before he came to the City Council, and certainly since he's been here, singularly focused on creating strategies to increase the housing stock at all levels. But we know that housing is a quality of life issue, as important as raising the minimum wage. Or yesterday we took some historic steps to providing sick pay. But we also need to be focusing on how we are providing greater housing resources for citizens in our community. To his credit, I think he struck a collaborative relationship not only with those who need housing, but those who provide housing, the landlords and the developers. We are all in this together. And as you rightfully pointed out, Mr. Chair, several us council members are renters. I'm one of them. I've been a landlord and I've been a renter. Now I'm a renter, and so I understand the challenges, but also the opportunities. So I look forward to the comments here. Look forward to continually work with my colleagues on this issue. Marquise Harris Dawson and I share a border. Gil Cedillo and I share a border. So we are all in this together. And we are committed to working through these issues and striking the kind of balance that ultimately will help improve the quality of life for the citizens that we're representing. So I look forward to the conversation, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Mr. Price. I'm proud to be joining both of you, both of whom I share a border with on the north and east sides. And if you know Los Angeles, you know Los Angeles is a city where most of us have lived in different parts of it at different times in our lives, or will live in different parts of it at different times in our lives. I'm very happy that the chairperson has seen fit to have this Renters Day at your request. I see ACE, I see LA CAN, I see a host of progressive organizations, folks who are getting people involved in the process of creating the kind of reality where we can see our best potential. I think this is among the most important issues we can deal with. I said earlier today in council that were it not for the renters' rights movement in the 70s and 80s, we probably would have been facing the homelessness crisis that we face now, some 20 or 15 years sooner. It's because activists got involved and interrupted the regular flow of things that an environment was created where working people could afford a basic apartment in this town. And I think that's the only way we're going to get back to a situation where a person who has a job, who's working class, can afford an apartment in most parts of this city. This is something that the market will not do on its own. Only activists can push the public sector to intervene and make this happen. We have a situation now where if you look at the median price for rent and you look at the median income, there's a big gap. I wonder how anybody's affording an apartment, frankly, these days, the way the prices are. And so we really appreciate what you all have done. And there are a few things that are more important. And I say to the chair, if it's hot outside, it's because these folks are heating it up. And they ought to keep the heat on until we get to where we need to be. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can we have the reps? Thank you, all of you, and applaud yourself. Can we have the reps from the LA Renters Coalition come up, please?
Thought I was going to slide on the chair. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Steve Diaz, and I am with the Renters Day Coalition.
Mr. Diaz, 1 second before. Do you need to read this into the record?
I already have, Mr. Chair.
I thought so.
Can you just say your name and your organizations as you start so we get it on the...
Sure. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Steve Diaz, and I am with the Renters Day Coalition, an effort that is supported by over 40 community organizations from across the city. Today, we see it as a continuation of the last 3 years of organizing to get to this historic moment of dialogue occurring between tenant advocates and council members. Moving forward, we hope this dialogue continues and includes tenant voices from across the city. We thank this committee for this opportunity once again, and we hope that this committee can take leadership on issues of rent burden and displacement, the housing crisis as we see it. We see the crisis as a circle. lack of bad regulation results in widespread speculation, loss of affordable housing, evictions, skyrocketing rents. 14% increase between last year and now. Rent burden leads to eviction, which leads to displacement from neighborhoods, or at times worse, from the city, which leads to homelessness. More and more tenants are in a constant state of crisis. The housing crisis is not unique to LA. Many cities across the country are grappling with the same issue and are being forced to adopt controversial measures, such as the city of Oakland, which just passed a 90-day moratorium on rent increases. Together, we feel that government and tenants can work to address the needs of renters and be proactive to keep LA housed. A key component of homelessness. There has been huge political momentum to deal with homelessness and housing creation, but there has been no coordinated effort to prevent homelessness from being created. Renters are paying more rent and incomes, higher costs than ever, while resources and tools to address the housing problems have diminished or dramatically been declined. Another example is the amount of money that is spent by the Los Angeles Police Department tackling on homelessness. 87.3 mil could be used towards housing creation instead of criminalization.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Telmi Perez. I'm here with the Renters Day LA Coalition. I want to talk a little bit about the housing crisis that you all have inherited as some of the newer members of our city council. And that housing crisis really has its roots in failed policies and policies that exist that you all are now trying to grapple with. I want to talk a little bit about the 1995 Costa Hawkins Act, as this is a state law that has really impeded any progress in expanding the rent stabilization ordinance and improving it. The three main provisions of this act are, one, that housing constructed after 1995 must be exempt from local rent controls. So that means that we cannot create more rent-controlled housing or rent-stabilized housing. Two, that new housing that was already exempt from local rent control laws in place before February 1st, 1995 must remain exempt. And three, vacancy decontrol. This is a provision that says that once a unit is vacant, that the landlord can then reset the rents at what the market will bear. And this provision has really spurred evictions, as landlords who seek market rents can only obtain them from vacating and re-renting a unit. Let's talk a little bit about the 3 to 5% minimum increase, but we'll talk about this a little bit later. What's important to note is that the 3 to 5% minimum floor really has no basis in economics. By raising the 3% to 5% minimum every year, what happens is that rents continue to rise exponentially, and that's what we're seeing, and that's part of what's fueling so many evictions and displacement in our city. The tenant pass-throughs as well, we don't have currently an analysis of how this really furthers the rent burden. So it's very important that we really think about when we're going to pass or allow another pass-through to go through to tenants, as this is something that can raise rents, and we talked about this as we were talking about the seismic retrofit motions and ordinance. And then lastly, the Ellis Act, and we're going to hear more about this later on from our colleagues in HCID, the Housing Department, so we won't get too into the specifics, but what I do want to say, and what's important to note, is that when a tenant is evicted via the Ellis Act, which is something that's been rising, the use of it has been rising, he or she loses any previous rent control privileges, which is something that's easily forcing renters out of the city. And if you take a look at this next slide, what this is really showing is how out of control the rent burden is. In 2013, the median rent burden of the city is 47% of income. And of course, rent burden is that percentage of your income that you pay towards housing costs. 47% is the highest in the nation, and this is the average. And currently, the current rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Los Angeles is $1,970. This is completely out of reach for the majority of the renters of the city of Los Angeles. And just to give you some perspective at how fast rents rise, if I was to rent an apartment today at $1,970, in 3 years, I would be paying between $2,147 and $2,280, depending on whether or not I was paying the 3 or the 5% increase. And in 10 years, my rent would be as high as $3,209. The reason this is so important is because the rent burden affects the poorest in our city the most, where 8 of 10 of the poorest housed families are paying over half of their incomes just towards rent. And as long as this is a reality, we're going to continue to see homelessness in the city of Los Angeles. And then real quickly, this is a statistic from the LA County Department of Public Health that published a study last year that was looking at housing as a social indicator for health. And basically, this is a very important quote that talks about the link between housing and health, because unaffordable housing reduces the income that a household has available for other subsistence needs, such as food, health care, and transportation, meaning that if there's any crisis for a family that's paying over half of their income just towards rent, a transportation crisis, a medical crisis, any kind of crisis that they have, that's really going to make it so that the next month they might not have a place to live.
Good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Blaney. I'm with Unión de Vecinos and the Renters de LA Coalition. And so what I wanted to address was some additional challenges that we have. And one of those has to be around evictions. There's over 50,000 unlawful detainers that were filed in LA between 2014 and 2015. That's a lot of people that have been pushed out of their housing. Ellis Act evictions are on the rise. In 2014, there were 1,214, and that includes occupied and unoccupied units. One of the things we have to look at in those numbers is the unoccupied, the ones that get vacated before the intent to withdraw is there, because there's a lot of tactics that go in to push people out there. And those really almost tripled from 376 in 2013. Poor quality housing is also a factor. We have to preserve the housing that we have, not just in terms of affordability, but also in terms of maintenance. And then the LA County Department of Public Health reports that housing instability and eviction causes adverse mental health impacts, behavioral issues, and other kind of problems for tenants that make it difficult for them to maintain stable housing. In addition, let's look at the net loss of affordable housing. When we look at affordability, we have to also be looking at affordable for the person who's living in the neighborhood and for that person. And we have loss of rent-stabilized units, 638 back in HC reports, and 638,000 in 2006, and now we have a little of 623,000 that are under rent control. So we're losing our stock of affordable housing that's under rent control, and we need to protect that. There's expected loss of 15,737 coveted units that will go up through 2021. We need to protect those. And there's 800 units of public housing in the city of LA that are slated for demolition. So there's this pattern, there's this trend around demolishing the type of affordable housing, around public housing and rent control housing, that we need to stop and curtail.
I wanted just to give you a couple examples of how this affects our community members. And so there's an example of Councilmember Price of your district, 2913 South Flower Street, where this is a group of tenants, 34 units. It's long-term families. They've lived there between 15 and 35 years. And they have really struggled as the housing market near USC has become more amenable towards bringing students into those housing units. So what we've seen is an increase in the eviction of long-term families who have been stable in that community for a very long time. Particularly as the Expo line has been built through this community, there's a lot of speculation. And the building was recently sold to a new owner, development giant Jade Enterprises. And as Jade Enterprises has purchased this building, they've also assembled 2 other buildings on the block. There's 4 total buildings on the block. So tenants are just bracing themselves to try to figure out how to prepare for the inevitable and how to fight to protect their housing. The housing department, recently did an assessment of the building's conditions and noticed many violations and deemed the building substandard. One thing that's really important to notice is the way that these substandard conditions kind of lead to attrition. Whereas those new students that are moving into this building have fully renovated, beautiful units, the families that have lived there for 30 years and really have paid a lot of people's mortgages towards this building are suffering with poor quality conditions that impact their health. Also in Council District 1, there's an example, this is your district, Councilmember Cedillo, a new example of a 30-unit property on South Columbia Avenue where a new owner bought the property and then issued cash for keys agreements asking the tenants to move out by July 31st. This is something that we're seeing increase across the city, and the effect is that we're losing the affordability in our neighborhoods as well as the the families of our neighborhoods. So we cannot separate the housing units from the actual people who are living there and suffering and who have lived through many years of lack of investment.
So why are we here before you? Besides presenting all of the problem of what's going on and giving context, well, we're here to ask you something. We are asking the city for specific things. First of all, to start with engaging in hearings across the city, definitely at least within the Housing Committee members' districts, to listen to tenants, to listen to ideas, recommendations from the people impacted the most around what can be done to keep people in their homes. Because we believe if we preserve the current housing stock, because we won't be able to build our way out of it, but to preserve what we have that's affordable will prevent homelessness. And the council is focused on dealing with the homelessness crisis. Well, this is another way to prevent more people being on the street. So we'd like you to organize some hearings in at least a minimum of the 5 council districts to collect and gather that information from community members and tenants. We would also like the city council to direct HCID to doing a comprehensive study and come back with some recommendations on how to relieve rent burden. And that can be very creative mechanisms of lots of different ways in which we can address that. But to make sure that it's comprehensive, looking at all the costs that confront tenants, as well, that includes pass-through, that includes rent hikes and utilities and metro, looking at all of the costs that the tenants are dealing with, so that we can come up with creative mechanisms to try and make it more affordable for people to be able to stay in their homes and not end up on the street. So we're asking for that report and for recommendations from HCID to come before you in a timely manner, because we know this could take a long time. We know the Economic Roundtable was issued in 2009, and we're still needing to address rent burden, so we'd like it to be in a timely manner. We'd also like to look at, as possible as one of those recommendations, around eliminating the annual 3% rate increase as the minimum and tying that again to CPI. When the economy is great, rents go up. When the economy is not so well, rents are reflected in that as well. So rent increases are reflected in that. So tying it to that. And we'd also like to look at some really Ellis recommendations. Ellis is a really key tool that the city can have, trying to work to make sure not so many of those rent-controlled units are lost through Ellis, so a way of slowing that down to make sure that tenants can stay in their home. And then we'd like to close with thanking you for your time and with a quote from one of our tenants. Those most affected must be valued as an integral part of the solution side in political decision-making if we are to succeed in ending this housing crisis. Thank you.
Before we move to the questions from my colleagues, I want to summarize this and see if I've got this right. So number 1, we want to focus on a preservation strategy. Number 2, we want citywide hearings. Number 3, we want a report from HCID on rent burden strategies, right? What are the elements of rent burden and what are strategies to deal with that? Number 4, we want to revisit the 3% annual increase and study whether or not a API benchmark would be more appropriate. And then finally, we want a review of Ellis and what are the parameters of us working with statewide legislation. Is correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bryce.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the testimony. And I share and understand the concern, the urgency in the concern. And I think all these are good recommendations that I'm sure the chair and my colleagues will follow up on. In the area of covenants, expiring covenants, what role do you think that plays in the overall picture? Is it something we should be focusing on, not focusing on? Really doesn't matter. Save them if you can, or save them at all costs. What's your take on it? I understand that we've got almost 10,000 covenants that are going to be expiring over the next 4 or 5 years. I know about 1,000 of those that are in the 9th district. But what's your take on those expiring covenants, what we should be doing, and what the significance in losing those units could be?
So, thank you for asking that question. This is a really important issue. I'm sorry, I gave somebody my slide. Here we go. I had some statistics for you. Can you borrow yours? So the housing element of Los Angeles, which was completed several years ago in 2013 through 2035, through 2023, what it did was it identified, can I see the slides? The other ones? Sure. Other ones. What it did was it identified that we need about 84,000, I want to say, and I have the exact figure right here. And I'm sorry, I don't have that exact figure for you, but it was approximately 84,000 units to meet the need of housing production in the city of Los Angeles, and about 57% of those are needed for low and extremely low-income people. So as we continue to bleed units from the housing market, affordable units, covenanted units are units that are affordable to residents based on their income for the most part, and we're not building to replace those, and we're also losing other forms of affordable housing. What that does is that's really putting our city in a situation where we're seeing increase in homelessness, or people are banished altogether from the city because they just cannot, if they lose affordability in their unit, or if they lose an affordable unit, then there is nowhere else in the city where they can actually find, in the private market, let's be very clear, where they will be able to replace that housing affordability as of now. And so the pace of development of affordable units is not matching the need for affordable units. We have a lot of luxury units that are coming online. All we have to do is walk through South Park and we see them coming up and up and up and rising, right? Walk through Highland Park and we see exactly the same thing. What we're not seeing is an effort to really, and I know that there have been efforts in the recent history, so we applaud those efforts. What we really need to do is build at the lower levels, at the lower incomes, so that we can really protect the culture of our city, which is made up and composed by a majority renter population and a working class citizenry.
So again, so preserving these covenants then should be the highest priority or a high priority? Or
It should be. I mean, definitely should be a priority because they are currently covenanted to be affordable at different affordability levels. So once those covenants expire, then it goes up to market rate, and then we lose them. So it is a priority, but we can't just part of what we're asking for is to be comprehensive. So we're not just looking at one specific thing. We have to look at multiple things to ensure the protection.
I agree, and we certainly need to construct. I'm just wondering what role, what are the negative impacts of losing, the current level of affordable housing. It sounds like you're saying it's
extremely important part, Councilmember Price, but it's part of the bigger pie as well. There needs to be a coordinated effort to ensure that the most vulnerable residents of the city of LA are able to basically stay housed in Los Angeles. So that goes everything from expiring use covenants to looking at rent burden tenants to looking at unfair pass-throughs such as the 2% pass-through that some RSO tenants face in master metered buildings. It's a multi-pronged approach in order to make sure people stay housed and off the streets.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I have a series of inquiries. Thank you all for your presentation and the thoughtfulness, the strategic way it was laid out, and the data that was in it. I had a couple other questions as we continue to struggle with this problem. Did you all, in any of your research or any of your work, look at this issue of entry into the rental market, right? So I don't have an apartment, I'm trying to get an apartment. So we hear anecdotal reports of sort of less acceptance of vouchers, both Section 8 vouchers and veteran vouchers, which are more than Section 8 vouchers. We also hear on the entry part, and we're struggling to figure out how to document this, but a good portion of our homeless population, the most common feature is an African American male, somewhere between the ages of 25 and 54. We also know from people who do legal work that the profile most likely to experience rental discrimination is an African American single male, right? It also works out that that's happens to be homeless, right? So that is to say, if an apartment manager has a choice between a mother and a young child and a single male with similar credit backgrounds, they pick the mother and the young child on the notion that they'll be more stable, more reliable. So that's my second question about race discrimination in entry. First vouchers, then race, and then third, I wanted to know if you all had looked at all what the regional situation is. So in other words, are we finding the same types of things with the Ellis Act and rent increases and evictions and all the things you all laid out? Are we finding that in Compton and West Hollywood and Gardena and, you know, Baldwin Park, so on and so forth? Is that something that you all looked at, and if so, what impact is that having on people in Southern California in general?
Well, I can talk to some of the experience that we've seen come through in Boyle Heights. So in Boyle Heights, with a lot of the proposed redevelopment that's going on from Metro, from Sears, from Rivenwood, from the bridge tearing down, we see a lot of land speculation, and we're seeing a lot of new landlords coming in, pressuring current tenants to move out because they're under rent control. They can try and get more rent. We're seeing comments being made by landlords and managers that they are looking more for white people to rent in these units because they can pay more. And this is information I'm getting directly from various managers in many buildings across Boyle Heights. We are also seeing that some of the of our members in Boyle Heights who are being evicted and are leaving, they're looking to go outside the city to some of the, either to Maywood or Commerce or Downey because they can't afford it in other parts of the city. And some of the new tenants that have been coming into Boyle Heights are saying, I can't afford to live in North Hollywood, Silver Lake, Echo Park, or the West Side anymore. So that's why I'm coming here. So we're seeing this trickle down effect, and it's very interesting that some of those communities they mentioned are tied to some of the hot spots that are being Ellis'd right now, and where gentrification is having a play. So now it's beginning to impact specifically Boyle Heights, and then through other communities. So it's this pattern and this trend and this circle.
In terms of entry into the rental market, I wanted to just quote a figure from the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles' 2016 agency plan that looked at the number of people on the waiting list. It didn't specify towards race, but it did specify towards income. And what it found was that there were 41,000 families on the waiting list for public housing and or Section 8 vouchers. Our Section 8 waiting list has been closed for over 10 years, closer to 14 years, I believe, at this point. And of those 41,000 families waiting on that list, 91% of them are extremely low-income families. So that really shows us the need for housing at those rates, at those incomes. I'm going to allow my colleague from LA Can to speak on homelessness.
Just a couple of things I would like to add to that. One of which is we cannot think of subsidized programs, subsidy programs as the answer. They're part of the pie. We gotta advocate and continue to ensure that these programs continue to exist and that the federal government gives more and more to them, but they're not the answer. In terms of this race and discrimination, I'm reminded of a coworker of mine's, an organizer with LA Can, who right now is going through the same situation. It has been stable for over 10 years, has a stable income, is actively engaged in his community, but because of a prior incident he had over 20 years ago, by the time the background check comes, he was denied. He was actually just about to move into housing less than a few weeks ago. So I use that example to say, yes, housing discrimination has always been there, will continue to be there. Tenant harassment has gone up. There was a recent story done in The Guardian by Dan Ross that talked about it. So I go all around to say that, yes, it's an issue. It's also part of the pie in order to create the solution.
There are also mechanisms in place to prevent, to flat out prohibit race discrimination, but that since we know that it's an issue, we have to make sure that we're directing issues to meet that need, to address that issue. So that's another very important piece. I'm glad you bring it up, and I hope that it's something that you think about as we move forward in talking about what kinds of legislative proposals we can make to address the greatest need, and that is one of them.
And including to that, and with Steve mentioning around the harassment, even the city adopting an anti-harassment ordinance would do something as well to keep people in their homes. Santa Monica, Oakland, New York, all have anti-harassment ordinances, and they have found that they've been able to retain people more in their homes. So that would be another thing to look at as part of this study.
And we have to build. We have to build as well. We have to make sure that there's an adequate supply of affordable housing at the levels that communities needs in order to access them, in order to make sure that folks continue to have opportunities as well.
So I appreciate y'all's responses to my questions, and I know I was a little bit out of the box for what you all had presented, but I just wanted to get your opinion. And I agree with your assessment that the only way to deal with any of this is to build, because when you build, you take pressure off the market, and then you move the power away from the person with the apartment to the renter, right? I've been a landlord at different parts of time when the market was much different, and the way you addressed a tenant was much different than the things that you find now. One last thing that I wanted to ask about, because while we're building, I still think we got to call out and shame the most egregious behavior. This is anecdotal, so I don't know how widespread it is or isn't. In my district, the way affordability expresses itself is through Section 8 vouchers, right? So we have by far the highest concentration of Section 8 vouchers. What we're hearing now from tenants is, even with a Section 8 voucher, the landlord accepts the voucher but does a credit check to see if you can pay the $25 or $40 or whatever it is portion of the rent, and makes decision on which section, because now landlords have their choices of Section 8 vouchers, tenants, to see which Section 8 voucher tenant they're going to allow to stay in their place. Have you all heard anything about this? And then two, do you know if there's a mechanism, because I know Section 8 is not a city program, do you know if there's a mechanism that can help us sort of confront this kind of behavior?
So I do not know if there's a mechanism. I believe other municipalities have passed ordinances that require landlords to accept Section 8 vouchers, but I would defer and say that that's something for research and possibly could come out of the dialogue if it continues.
And I'm very glad you bring this up, because the thing about Section 8, a Section 8 voucher that people don't understand, particularly as we're looking at the demolition and the redevelopment of public housing, is that public housing is the only permanent source of affordable housing. It doesn't matter what your income is. Your income can go up and down, and your rent will stay at 30% of your income. With Section 8 vouchers, which are being utilized and handed out as public housing is being taken off the market, there's this false narrative about Section 8 vouchers allowing you to decide where you're going to live, where we know, right, from your district, that there are not very many landlords in other parts of the city that are even willing to take Section 8 vouchers. And if you do find a landlord who's willing to take a Section 8 voucher, there are different forms of discrimination that people encounter. But the other thing is that the landlord can opt out of that contract with the federal government, and that places the tenant in the position where they have to go back out into a very tough market to try to find another landlord who will take that Section 8 voucher. So Section 8 vouchers, while they're necessary, like Steve said, they're a part of the pie, they're very important, but right now it's very difficult to comprehend the fact that we're looking at taking public housing units off the market, giving people Section 8 vouchers and telling them go out there and find a place to live, where we know that those places are very few and far between.
Thank you.
Right. In addition, and that your example has happened a lot as well, that I've seen in parts with Boyle Heights around that with the credit checks. But then also understanding that whenever we demolish something, is that you're just forcing more people to compete with what's already there. And especially with the public housing, you're taking a very low income affordable unit and giving them a section voucher, which is what the Housing Authority wants to do, and say, okay, now go compete with everybody else. And so, that's why it's so important to preserve this, because even though there's the comment around the building part, if we don't keep what we have and make sure it's affordable, then things are going to increase.
And if you look at our circle that we presented in the beginning, it all starts with lack of regulation. So there's got to be government intervention. There's got to be a way of stabilizing not just our RSO stock, but additional housing stock in general.
Thank you. Mr. Price?
Yeah, just a follow-up question. Earlier in the presentation, on the page about net loss of affordable housing, the comment is 800 units of public housing in the city of LA are slated for, it says here, disposition. Is that, what do we we mean by that? For elimination?
Yes,
Huh?
demolishing it. They do plan on demolishing it.
So you're talking about where Jordan Downs
Yes.
specifically? Is that where the 800 are?
Yes.
700 units at Jordan Downs are slated to be removed from the market as public housing and replaced with affordable housing at varying income levels. What we do know about the residents of Jordan Downs is that the average family or the average income per family is $16,000 a year. So it's that's very important housing, critical housing. So it's 700 units there and also 700 units in the northeast area of Los Angeles.
100 units at Rose Hills.
I'm sorry, 100 units at Rose Hills Courts, which is in the northeast area of Los Angeles, close to Councilmember Cedillo's district.
And they're not doing one-for-one replacement, so that's part of what the problem is in terms of the affordability levels.
Okay, and there was a comment made about the person, one of your colleagues that was seeking the apartment, and they did the credit, thought he was lined up okay and did the credit check, and that's one of the things we're looking at is banning that box on applications for employment, for credit, for housing. At least, it asks that question after the individual is otherwise qualified, because frequently you're right, they just look at that box, yes, I've been convicted, and the person is eliminated from consideration. And so we think that taking that box off, or at least putting it at the end of the application, at least gives the individual a chance to prove or to demonstrate or explain what the derogatory item may have been and how long it may have been, hopefully not to make it difficult for them to achieve their goals. Anyway, thank you for the comment.
Thank you.
Do you guys have suggestions for funding for preservation? Any recommendations? Were you thinking the housing fund, or do you have any other ideas or thoughts on this?
For funding specifically,
Yes.
for example, eliminating the minimum rent and then tying that more to CPI, that wouldn't necessarily require any additional funds from the city to do a change like that. That would just continue to fall under our RSO's investigation unit to make sure that was happening, but that would not require additional funding.
I was talking more about the contracts that exist for preservation contracts.
One clear way of funding source that's out there. I was laughing when you guys said it because all three of you are members of the city's homelessness committee, is redirecting the $87 million that was used towards criminalizing homeless individuals, from redirecting it from the police department into actual good opportunities, such as the preservation that you're talking about, Councilmember Cedillo. So excuse me for my laugh.
Does the registry play any role in this? What role does it play? The rent registry?
The rent registry, to us, in our view, the rent registry is incredibly important because if we have an idea, if we can track and look at the rent variables across different districts in the city of Los Angeles, then we can make better decisions about land use. We can make better decisions when, for example, a landlord wants to Ellis a building. We can look at that building and say, actually, these units are still are affordable in this market, and so we want to preserve those. So we can make better decisions about how, and better legislation as well as about how to preserve the housing stock that we currently have that is currently affordable to low-income families.
My data is really old, but if you look at the 2010 Economic Roundtable assessment that was done of the city's rent stabilization ordinance, a good number of the complaints that HSID received were for illegal rent increases, which by having a registry could assist in making sure that those rents were correct, for example, and also can assist in enforcement as well.
On Citywide Hearings, do you guys have any suggestions you want to offer?
Sure. So the last time we engaged in something like this was in 2010 when the current council president, Herb Wesson, held a hearing in his district to which hundreds of residents turned out to talk about how they were being affected in that housing market, and that actually led us towards looking at a moratorium on rent increases. Unfortunately, that moratorium failed, but what was really key about that process was that tenants flocked to that center to talk to their council person. They wanted to share their experiences and let you know what is happening on the day-to-day life of a person who's struggling to pay the rent and what that could look like, what policy could look like to alleviate that. So our idea is that by having this committee in our communities that are facing and that are really burdened with the pressures of the housing crisis, that you can then show our city that you are willing to take bold steps to hear from people, right? So it's difficult to come to a city council meeting at 10 a.m. in the middle of a workday for a working person, or a person who has children, right? So what we're asking is that you go out into people's communities where people live and try to understand what people are facing so that can inform your legislation. And then you can look at some of these recommendations that we made and say, okay, so this is where this is coming from, because people actually are asking, what about this solution? What about that solution? The people, like it says in the quote up here, those who are most affected must be valued as an integral part in your decision-making process, so that we can have a healthier and a vibrant Los Angeles that includes members of every economic class, of every racial class, of every different background.
I got that. I was asking you more, I'm sorry for not being more specific, but did you have suggestions on where? I was asking a where question, not a why question.
In your council districts. So where? Let's do one at MacArthur Park and see who comes out. South Central City Hall.
I'm sorry, I'm fine with that. We'll do one in our district, but I just wanted to know.
We're asking you to be creative.
That's fine.
But
That's a good
definitely.
answer. I just didn't hear you say council districts.
Council districts, yes. We were referring to council districts.
Okay, I got that. Thank you.
And there was a similar process done through street vending a few months back. So.
What is the, this is a question for you all, because I recognize you all as a leading activist on issues of housing. What is the level of organizing or engagement in the sort of further out from the center of the city? So, you know, parts of the valley have a high concentration of renters. There's Palms, for example, on the west side, and big portions of Harbor City. As well. I'm just wondering, like, who's organizing there, what the density is. You know, Hollywood. Hollywood's another huge example where there's tremendous pressure on renters. Sort of who's organizing out there, what the status is, because I just worry sometimes, at least when you're here, those parts of the city seem like they're not necessarily a part of the discussion, even though I know that all the same things are probably happening in those communities.
So I'm glad you bring that up, because I want to mention that who you have in the room today, the Renters Day LA Coalition, are over 40 organizations in all different parts of the city who are working together to address this city council to address the housing crisis. So in Pacoima, for example, we have Pacoima Beautiful, who is here with us right now. We're doing excellent work. In the west side, we have the people organized for West Side Renewal Power that's also doing fantastic work. In every different area of the city, you have organizations that are really trying to work on these issues. But you're right, it's not enough, because there are so many tenants who still, to this day, don't understand their rights under the Rent Stabilization Ordinance, don't understand that they have rights as tenants, and we continue seeing people being pushed out of their housing because they think that a 3-day notice means you have to move out in 3 days. So it's very important to make these current policies and rights that exist accessible to tenants wherever you are in the city. Even if there is not an organization there, they should be seeing information, visual information about their rights as tenants.
Thank you. And just to give our friends at the LA Tenants Union a shout out, because of the reasonings you brought out, the Tenant Union was formed to ensure that tenants from different sectors of the city who are being impacted by these Ellis Act evictions come together and support. And they're part of the Renters Day LA collaborative as well, coalition, excuse me.
Thank you. On a related subject, are you guys tracking the initiatives that are being proposed that will impact zoning and pose a danger to any building in the city?
Yes, we are tracking it, yes.
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 Okay. Want to elaborate on it?
Well, we're tracking on it. We're still, as a coalition, need to have a conversation around what the position as a coalition is as the Renters Day LA Coalition on it, but yes, we are tracking on it.
And I also want to mention that these kinds of these kinds of creative, different, processes that we see people looking at ballot initiatives, people in different parts of the state looking at other ways to engage their elected officials, to offer solutions, to build solutions with affected communities, are important. So in San Francisco, right, there was a ballot initiative to preserve housing in the Mission. Unfortunately, it was failed. There was a ballot initiative around Airbnb that's also happening here in Los Angeles. So you have a lot of folks who are starting to look at the legislative process and saying, we can't hurry up and wait anymore. We need to hurry up and do something.
Okay. All right, well then, let's do that. Let's move this. Any other questions? Let's move this forward. I thank you very, very much for this, and then I think we're going to move to public comment next, so we can hear from other renters. So
Thank you.
thank you. Can we have item 2 read into the public comment item 1? Okay, so let's do this. Public comment item 1, Deanne Newkirk. Please come up. 1 minute. Carol Citrone. Wayne from Encino. Steve Luffman. Let's start with that.
Hi, I've never done this before. Do I have 1 minute?
Yes.
My name is Deanne Newkirk. I live on Hayworth Avenue, and last year a developer named Weissman Residential, he's the most aggressive developer in Los Angeles. He's evicted 300 tenants in LA, and he tore down 3 historic buildings to the south of me. He then, in July of 2015, bought my building and the building to the north. He's about ready to buy the 3rd building, do another 3 tear-down lot. And my 4-month-old, my husband and I were about ready to be evicted by this man. I'm asking for you to take care of renters and tenants in the city. We pay taxes, we pay our local tax, we are educated, we take care of our community, and we do not deserve to be evicted, all in the name of profit and greed. Thank you. I have affordable housing, and I want to keep my affordable housing so I can stay home with my baby at this time. Please, we beg you to take care of us.
Who was the developer?
The developer's name is Michael Cohenzad, Cohanzad, of Weissman Residential. He has evicted 300 people thus far, and he's continuing to go. LA Times deemed him as the most aggressive developer in LA.
Where's the property?
Property's at 427 or 423 North Hayworth Avenue, right behind historic Cantor's Deli. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Carol Citrone. I'm a resident of Silver Lake, and I'm actually a landlord. And I'm here because, as a landlord, I take my responsibilities very seriously, caring for my tenants, making sure that they have a safe and stable place to live. In the last year, I've been made aware of horrific abuses by developers who have absolutely no interest in the role of landlord, and yet they take on that role in order to abuse the Ellis Act. It has to stop. The Ellis Act must be either a moratorium or some very deep changes need to be made. The other thing that I notice happening is that in a lot of we can't develop ourselves out of this. We can't build ourselves out of this crisis. A lot of the new development, the vast majority of new development is luxury. This increases luxury tenants, which demand more luxury businesses. In the last year, we've had a pharmacy, a doctor, a dentist, 2 laundromats, and other community-serving businesses that have left because they no longer have a community to serve.
Hello, my name is Stephen Luftman. I'm a board member of Mid-City West, a city-certified neighborhood council, though I'm not speaking on their behalf. Over a year ago, my neighbors and I were evicted by the Ellis Act from our building in the Fairfax district. Many of us have lived there for over 20 years. The developer had bought the building shortly before the eviction and bought it to tear it down to build 11 luxury townhouses. He's tearing down 9 affordable apartments to build 11 multi-million-dollar townhouses. This is not how you build yourself out of a crisis. The 11 multi-million-dollar townhouses would not be affordable, would not bring down rents, are not serving anybody. They are not needed. I'm sorry. This is very emotional for me. I lived in my apartment for 19 years. I've been part of the community, and we have now or no longer could afford to live in our own community.
I called Wayne from Encino. Margaret Molly. Margaret Molly. Antonia Ramirez. Eduardo Torres.
1974, my family moved in a nice house on Vesper and Burbank Boulevard. 1985, the developers bought all the houses, widened the street, and then they threw us the fuck out in the street. Out in the fucking street in 1985. They were scumbags that ran this place then, and they're scumbags still doing it now, 31 years later. It's only because my father worked hard, we bought a house. You could buy houses, but we had to move to the West Valley, and we were able to put a down payment down. So I know what this bullshit's like. It's the Ellis Act. It's developers. They buy your seats on this council. They own you. It's not going to stop until that stops.
Margaret Molly.
Hello, sir. I thank you for holding this hearing. I'm a Venice community member. On Monday of this week, the LA Housing Department hosted a private invite-only meeting to discuss the land use plan for Venice. The majority of the 37 people on that invite-only list were developers, real estate brokers, business owners. There were 3-4 people who were potentially representative of the community, but really, they don't live in Venice long-term. There was no renters. There was no dialogue with the indigenous, multi-generational community or representation. And I have the list. I want to submit it to you. And I want to submit the talking points, a preliminary dialogue. Point A, share issues that affect you and your fellow community members in the Venice coastal zone. Really? Developers, business people, no tenants? That's why we have a housing crisis. This list was submitted to the planning department by CD11, and they weaned from the list 37 participants. We have a crisis in LA. It goes from the top down. It's a reverse paradigm. We need to be the people who are answering, have you answering to us. It's being run like a hierarchy and a monarchy. It needs to change. I want to submit these, please.
Eduardo.
Good afternoon. My name is Eduardo Torres. I am a resident and a renter in Boyle Heights. Question I want to pose is, how many more Arseni buildings do we need in downtown Highway 1, off the 110? I drive by and I see this development of new buildings basically being built. Well, in Echo Park, the tax credit units that were built about 13 years ago are going to expire in the next 2 years, and those units that are 10% on basically affordable housing are going to go market rate. Those people were lied to when they were said that was going to be permanent affordable housing. One of the problems is we could build our way out of this, but if we don't control the land and the value of the land and own the land, market rate is going to continue to rise the prices. In San Francisco, rent for one bedroom is $3,600. Those numbers are very conservative that we see there. And what's going to happen is less and less people are going to be able to afford housing. The question is, how many more Arsani buildings do we need in the city when we have thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that are going to be homeless in the next 10 years? Thank you.
Thank you. I am homeless because I'm a victim of gang stalking because I happen to support Donald Trump by these wetbacks and gangbangers. The LA Renters Coalition is nothing more, most of them, is nothing more than a racist, hate-mongering wetbacks and Chango Latino gangbanging pussies and thieves, losers who orchestrate their position by bullying, stealing, asserting violence, threats, and intimidation and theft, and brazen gang stalking on innocent law-abiding citizens. These freeloading wetbacks and Chango Latino gangbangers are a private and public nuisance. They are nosy, venomously jealous, and violate the legal law-abiding tenants' rights to peaceful, quiet enjoyment and to a clean, safe, and viable, habitable place to live. They violate your privacy by criminally, illegally conspiring with other wetbacks and gangbangers and managers, maintenance and worker securities, and gang assholes to illegally trespass into your home and enter and place audio secret spyware in your home, violate you, and create noise harassment constantly. I would live with this.
Sylvia Shane, Harold Greenberg. Harold Greenberg. Harold? Harold Greenberg. And D. Same.
Hi, my name is Sylvie Shane. I am being evicted as a result of the Ellis Act. I wanted to make a comment with regards to the item of discussion with regards to affordable housing. It's really critical that you recognize that in this supply and demand model, that it's not just the supply, it's also the demand, and that we need to have a return right guarantee in all of these projects if people will be displaced. Otherwise, you're doing nothing but increasing the demand, and the supply can't outpace that demand. The other thing I wanted to bring up is that the mayor, in a transmission to the city council in November in the Affordable Benefit Fee Study, mentioned that housing that was created in the last 10 years has an average vacancy rate of 12%, whereas the rest of the vacancy rate for the city is at 3%. And that indicates the difference between the housing that's being built and the demand for it and the housing that we already have. So I ask you to recognize that and find a mechanism that either forces these new developments to be occupied before we allow any more affordable rent-stabilized housing to be destroyed in order to build more of those developments that are not being fully occupied. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Harold? Harold Greenberg?
Tenant without a landlord is homeless, and that's what we have today. A landlord without a tenant is bankrupt. We've got to work together, and we have to be with each other and solve the problem. Politicians can't do it on their own. The worst slumlord in Los Angeles is the city of Los Angeles. Who wants to live in Jordan Downs or any of those city properties? They're not taken care of. What we've got to talk about, frankly, is how do we do it? And the way we do it is with the tenants groups, the landlord groups, the housing, and this committee. We've got to work together. We can't be enemies. We're in the same boat. And many of us here do not realize that. We are not your enemies. When you take a look at the rent control, there should be a means test. When you look at Santa Monica, Venice, and places like that, People are making hundreds of thousands of dollars and they're under rent control. That isn't right. It's not fair to anybody, and we should have a means test in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Discussing the means testing, Mr. Greenberg.
Mr. Greenberg, thank you for that. I have D. Same. Suzette Shaw. I got it. Suzette Shaw and Amy Williams.
Thank you very much, first of all, for this time. I was referred here by the Eviction Defense Network. I'm a member of the NAACP. I'm the lead organizer for the Southern California ADAPT, the Internal Client Association, and I'm a spokesperson for Mind Freedom Los Angeles County. And I'm speaking on behalf of those groups right now. So I would just like to say that the renter's rights also applies to people in homeless shelters. And I'm currently homeless living in Salvation Army Bell Shelter, and there's been just tons of illegal evictions, and Eviction Defense Network even called them and told them it was an illegal eviction. So I would like to pass these out to everybody who would like one, because we're not getting attention. And they even have bathrooms outside. The bathrooms don't work, and the showers don't work, and we need help. I'd like to present this into the...
Right here to your right, sir.
Right.
Ms. Shaw.
Thank you. Good day. My name is Suzette Shaw. I am a Skid Row resident, an SRO renter. I am also seeking long-term housing through a Section 8 voucher, which I have had approximately 7 months. I have received several extensions, my last one just yesterday from Housing Authority. Thus far, I have found the process of finding permanent housing to be an arduous and discriminatory process, lacking cultural humility. Property owners see me as less than human. What brought you to Skid Row? Are you a Section 8? Are you Section 8 or are you normal? These are some of the things that have been said to me while also closing the door on me as well. The very social services employed to assist women like myself who are trauma survivors displaced to the streets take very little to no care with being intentional to assist us. Capitalism, high rent, background checks, credit checks, gentrification, these are all related to the updated Jim Crow issues, lacking cultural competency. All these issues deduce people back to the very streets where you all then penalize, criminalize, and police them with the laws and ordinances simply because they have nowhere else to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Amy Williams?
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Amy Williams. I'm a trial attorney at the Eviction Defense Network. I'm a tenants lawyer in Los Angeles because every landlord in LA has a lawyer, but none of the tenants do. My colleague Elizabeth Blaney, from the Renters Day Coalition, mentioned 50,000 evictions filed in LA this year. In the past 15 years since we've started taking count of those, it's been between 60 and 70%. Public funding exists to represent approximately 2% of those. Non-profit organizations such as my own that don't receive any public funding make up about another 8% of representation of tenants. About 48% of tenants never actually make it to court and are defaulted. The waiting room of our office is like an urgent care. That's how bad it is. Most of our cases involve landlords trying to evade rent control in order to raise the rent. Our cases, we see widespread tenant harassment. This is most frustrating for me because there are no remedies available for tenants. Please consider an anti-harassment ordinance. Please consider
flyers for legal resources for where tenants can find help. Not just my organization, but all of the organizations here, because getting legal resources to tenants when they need it is how you will stop this homelessness crisis and how you will stop this housing crisis. Eviction defense needs to be part of the strategy to preventing homelessness and fixing the housing crisis. And we can't do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you.
I submit this.
Ann Hars, Annabella Mazzariego, and Sheila Durand.
Hi, my name is Ann Hars. I'm an artist, and I am also a landlord. I feel like developers are profiteering from LA's homelessness crisis while making it even worse, and the City Council and the Department of City Planning is helping them do it. Anyone renting could find themselves displaced in a city that has made unaffordable by these luxury developments. In the end, demolition of rent-stabilized homes means families will become homeless, and the taxpayer will inevitably be asked to pay for more shelters and more homelessness services, just so these developers can make huge profits. This is profiteering from LA's homelessness crisis. The city needs to adopt a zero-loss policy on rent-stabilized homes. This will force developers to build along commercial corridors, which will then, in turn, help create a more sustainable walking city in areas established on more established metro corridors. Preserve existing architecture and lower the waste created by demolition and stabilize property values. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
So look,
No.
can we, if you're going to speak, turn in your cards. We want to put a cutoff so that we can move on to the next item. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Annabella Mazariegos. I'm from Occupy Los Angeles. Occupy fights foreclosures. Although I'm not speaking on behalf of them, but I'm a renter. I live in District 14. What's wrong with this picture? It is said that some elected officials are not paying attention of the people's needs, like Councilman Jose Uizar, that his district is suffering the increase of affordable housing. Also, the construction of new buildings, 80% market rate and 20% low income. These units are most of the time single-room occupancies. It's not a place to live with dignity. It's not it's a recipe to disaster because people become stressful looking for walls only. Why people cannot live with dignity with one bedroom, living room, and a kitchen? They are living like sardine cans. That's not fair. Fair housing accommodation is a human right. Stop the greed of landlords and developers.
Hello, my name is Sheila the Rod, and I am a tenant. I am facing being homeless in about a week through a default judgment possibly taken in the UD court. I have been harassed for 2 years by my landlords because I'm in a rent control unit. When I complained about an illegal rent increase, they started refusing to answer my emails or calls to make repairs. When I complained about an illegal lockout, because they locked us out of the building, within 6 days, I was served a 3-day notice to pay or quit for rent that I actually did pay, and they chose not to cash and held as a mechanism to try to evict me from my rent-controlled apartment. If they can evict me, they can raise the rent to double, and this is their goal. While the first unlawful detainer was pending, disregarding case law, they filed a second unlawful detainer. I was represented by legal aid during the first unlawful detainer, and legal aid told the opposing counsel that they could not represent me in a second one due to funding. They filed a second one and managed to get a default. I am facing homelessness because the UD courts are not, there's no checks and balances, and they are just choosing to go ahead and process these defaults. Now I'm in a losing position, trying desperately to keep my housing when I've done nothing wrong.
Good afternoon. My name is Eddie Javor, J-A-V like Victor, O-R. I am an 88-year-old veteran of the United States Marine Corps, honorably discharged during 1949 with the rank of second lieutenant. I have been unable to afford housing. I became homeless, and I am now staying in a hospital paid for by my insurance. I would respectfully request any assistance that you may give me.
Mr. Javor, we thank you for your service. I want you to talk to my staff. Right here, this young woman here will take your information. We're very excited about opening up several new locations for veterans like yourself. We just did one last week. And so I'm hoping that we have the resources, the housing to give you the dignity and appreciation you deserve.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your assistance.
Rob Kelly, Luis Saldivar, and Mark Lippman.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having this hearing, if you will, this afternoon. I am not a native California, but I will say I'm an arts veteran. There is no artist housing, really, unless you search. Maybe it's very, very, very hidden. There should be artist housing. Artist unions should be more aware of it. I am forced into disability and early retirement, although I've been working since I was popped out and on the books since 16, and I get very minimal because I worked for myself for many years. The demographics of the buildings in the area, in all areas, show that there are a good percentage of buildings that should be used as an example because they are doing 20% for affordable and lower, and elderly people need that. I'm very close. I'm 59. I shouldn't be forced to have to work if I can't because it's impossible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Luis Saldivar. I am a father, first and foremost. I am on the board of the Argyle Civic Association. I am working with the LA Tenants Union and soon to be a hunk member. I'm a resident of Los Angeles, and my hometown is Hollywood. I am also a citizen of the United States of America. I am here on behalf of the Yucca Argyle Tenants Association, and we are an association. Give me 1 second. We are an association of mixed-income, multi-ethnic, mixed-age, able and disabled-bodied, working and middle-class families and individuals, including several seniors who have lived there for over 55 years, and a veteran. I am here to tell you that we are staying and fighting to stay in our building. If you look at the report titled Hollywood Out of Control Hotel Boom Online Inventory, it's outrageous, and I believe might even be illegal, and is very dangerous for the residents of Los Angeles in terms of lack and crumbling infrastructure and safety. The cumulative impact of all this overdevelopment going across Los Angeles County without proper planning is going to make our city of Los Angeles unlivable within 5 to 10 years. This will be the legacy we leave to our kids who will not be able to afford to live here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Lippman with the West Side Tenants Union. I'd like to tell you about some of the most vulnerable people in our Venice community, those being seniors and disabled. They are being forced into evictions, and are the most vulnerable people that we have. An eviction for a senior is equivalent to a death sentence. Many of them will lose their Section 8 housing because of this and be forced into the streets. The developers, the management companies, they know this. One of the things that our allies up north are doing are they starting to push the district attorneys to file for felony senior abuse charges when these things happen. We need to make the penalties so severe that these developers and management companies and bad landlords will think twice before abusing and displacing our communities. And just quickly to your point of how we can raise some of the money. Right now in Venice, Google, Snapchat, and the big tech companies are receiving an 80% tax break, our money, to gentrify our communities. Our average rent in Venice is approximately $3,500 because of this. And so that is one thing. Another thing we need is a gentrification tax. Make it so difficult for these big companies to overdevelop that they're forced to build affordable housing. And a third thing we can do is take some of that $3 billion that we spend on the Los Angeles Police Department every year and shift some of that to our needed housing and public services. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, let's go to item number 2.
Item number 2 is Los Angeles Housing Community Investment Department report relative to the ordinance enforcement of Ellis provisions of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance and amending Los Angeles Municipal Code sections regarding the withdrawal and demolition of RSO units, also known as Ellis withdrawals.
Okay. Please come on up.
Good afternoon, Councilman. This is Anna Ortega, Director of Rent Stabilization for the Housing and Community Investment Department.
Please go ahead. Go ahead.
The Housing Department submitted a report on the status of the implementation of the RSO Ellis provisions and the status of RSO properties, and offered in our report recommendations designed to strengthen enforcement, preserve RSO units, ensure that tenant rights are protected, conform the RSO to state Ellis law, and recommend amendments to the state Ellis Act. By way of background, the Ellis Act is a state law adopted in 1995, which basically says that cities cannot prevent landlords from going out of the rental business. Los Angeles adopted our Ellis provisions, which basically restate the state provisions in 2006 and 2007, and adopted an enhanced tenant relocation program in 2006. Under the existing provisions, landlords must file a formal notice of intent to withdraw units from rental housing and follow detailed procedures through the Housing Department. Tenants must be provided a copy of the notice and at least 120 days notice. Seniors and disabled tenants are entitled to a 1-year extension. Relocation assistance, which currently ranges from $7,800 to $19,500 per household, must be provided to tenants who are evicted under any no-fault reasons under the RSO. Since the adoption of the enhanced tenant relocation program in 2006, over $45 million in relocation assistance payments have been provided to tenants through this program. The city's rules also require that units constructed to replace demolished units and offered for rent within 5 years are subject to the RSO, with exemptions from the RSO in return for affordable housing. Our report on pages 3 to 5 indicates the Ellis activity from 2001 through 2015. As you can see in the report, the great majority of Ellis evictions happened in 2005 and 2006, when approximately 10,000 units were removed under the Ellis Act. This activity dropped dramatically through 2009 when there were only 90 units removed in tandem with the downturn in the economy. But it began to rise again in approximately 2013 and tripled between 2013 to 2014. And then in 2015, we saw it sort of level off. We've been looking at this inventory of buildings. We have to say that a lot of the building is still in progress. There's about 28% of the ones we looked at from 2010 through 2014, where construction is still in progress. But from the data that we've been able to see, we find that twice as many units are being built to replace the units removed. So from 2010 to 2014, there were 2,251 RSO units removed, which will be replaced with 4,634 units. We've also looked at the status of what's going on with those properties, which is described on page 5 of our report. We have found 5 projects with affordable housing covenants for 55 years. We have about 3% that have been converted to non-residential and commercial use, 8% converted to single family, 5.5% for condo conversion, 2% that were legally put back on the market under the RSO, 19% where multifamily construction has been completed on site, 28% are still under construction, and in 26% there's been no activity. There's quite a bit of combining of these lots, so where we started out with 488 units, through various lot ties, these have been combined into 405 properties. Only 5 of the properties, which is 1%, are beyond the 5-year threshold, which makes the replacement units not subject to the RSO. The great majority of these are still under construction or in some phase where they require continued monitoring. So that's about 62% of the inventory that we looked at. We also provide information on our current enforcement efforts and outreach efforts. I won't go into all of them at this time, but some of the highlights include the implementation of an upgraded rent system to assist in monitoring of these properties. In 2015, we uploaded into ZEMAS, the city's database, information on all of the Ellis properties to make this available to the public, as well as RSO units. We've also started enforcing the Ellis provisions on vacant properties, vacant units, which is very important. In January of 2015, AB 2222 took effect, which requires one-for-one replacement of RSO units for approval of density bonuses. We've been working closely on outreach for both landlords and tenants. We hold workshops throughout the year. In 2015, we held over 200 workshops. We've also been working closely with the Mayor's Innovation Team to target outreach efforts to tenants to limit tenant displacement. We also have forwarded to the Mayor and Council a transmittal with recommendations having to do with cash for keys agreements and tenant buyouts. These would require full disclosure, filing with the city, and the right for tenants to rescind cash for keys agreements. As we looked at the Ellis provisions, the existing Ellis provisions, we have found areas where we recommend additional amendments to the RSO to close some loopholes that we've identified as we've gained experience in dealing with these properties. Some of these recommendations include formalizing in the RSO the requirement to file Ellis applications, even if the RSO units are vacant. Clarifying in the RSO that the re-renting of withdrawn units nullifies any previously filed Ellis application, and that the landlord must refile and restart the time frame if they put the units back on the market. We would like to amend the RSO to require an annual reporting of the status of the property. Also, any RSO units demolished after the effective date of the city's Ellis provisions on September 29, 2006, without the filing of an Ellis application, must be required to file an application which would make any replacement units subject to the RSO. There's some other formal technical amendments to bring it closer into line with state law. Also, with regard to tenant relocation services, under some cases, tenants may waive their tenant relocation, but sometimes the time that it takes for the conversion of the property is drawn out for many years. So we're recommending that tenants who have lived in their units for at least 1 year be eligible for relocation services, even if they are not eligible for the relocation funds. Our report also includes recommendations for amendment of the State Act. The mayor recently endorsed SB 1267 by Senator Allen that requires a 1-year notification for tenants with children in school. The city should support this bill. In addition, the City of West Hollywood recently adopted a resolution which requires a 1-year notification for all tenants, and that landlords must notify all tenants that they evicted that they intend to put the property back on the market. The City of Los Angeles should likewise support these proposals. Some of our stronger recommendations have to do with the current rules for the replacement unit exemption for replacement housing bill on a property that has been Ellis'd. Currently, the provisions require that in order to get an exemption from the RSO for the newly constructed units, the landlord must provide either the number of units demolished or 20% of the new units as affordable. The current provisions say whichever is lower. We're recommending that this be changed to be at least the number of RSO units demolished, again in keeping with our goal of achieving 1-for-1 replacement of RSO units. There also is a recommendation to extend the term of the covenant in order to qualify for an exemption to 55 years rather than the existing 30 years, and to use the affordability levels set by the California Department of Housing and Community Development rather than the federal level. Finally, there's a number of areas where there are recommendations for additional approval that require the cooperation and input from the Departments of Building and Safety, Planning, and the City Attorney to review the feasibility of disallowing demolition permits until the property owner has obtained approval for all discretionary and ministerial permits for new construction. A second is a moratorium on conversions and an annual cap on demolition of RSO units, limiting the conversion of properties for transient use, that is, limiting the ability of landlords to convert apartments into hotels. And finally, to review the impact of the small lot subdivision ordinance to evade the Ellis provisions. So these will be the additional areas to be reported on in future reports. I am available to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? I thank you for that. I want to hear from public comment. I appreciate your report. It's very thorough and very helpful. Our challenge is to reconcile your report with many of the anecdotal evidence that we're receiving today. But fortunately, we're just hearing the reports, and so that gives us some time to deliberate and chew on them for a little bit. So I thank you very, very much. Sylvia Swan? Sylvia? Sylvie? Okay. Andrew Douglas? Luis Saldivar? Wayne from Encino? Margaret Molly? Sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Andrew Douglas, and I'm a consultant in the nonprofit sector, but I'm also a renter. It's interesting. I was trying to conceptualize what a visualization of development would be, and it suddenly hit me that it's like a monopoly board. You have a monopoly board, and you have all the colors, and they represent the 4 million people that are the angels of Los Angeles. And what you're supposed to do in Monopoly is you're supposed to go around in the Monopoly board, and you're supposed to buy St. James Place and buy Baltic, and then build housing on there and build hotels on there, and then finally you might get up to Park Place and Boardwalk. But when the term development and development only is used, it's being used across town in a very callous fashion by some very bullish developers and development interests. And the point is that they're not putting houses and hotels on Baltic Place and Marvin's Gardens. They're buying those properties and turning them into Boardwalk and Park Place. And you're not supposed to turn the whole monopoly board into Boardwalk and Park Place. So responsive development, proportional development, just anything with the nomenclature, but please, thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you.
Luis Aldivar, again, here. I am a resident of Hollywood, and I am here to put comment on this because I am representing the Yucca Argyle Tenants Association, and we have come to learn that we are facing possible eviction due to a new proposed development by Champion Real Estate in partnership with Riley Realty LP and our landlord, Rubenfeld Family Limited Partnership. Champion Real Estate plans to displace 44 households and eliminate 40 affordable rent-stabilized apartments to build a 15th new hotel and 12th luxury housing complex in a 1.5 square mile area. And as I mentioned before, the cumulative impact of all this overdevelopment in Hollywood is going to crumble our city. Thank you.
Margaret Malloy. The Ellis Act has been used in Venice. There were 795 units of affordable housing built specifically for middle-class workers at the aircraft industry on a 30-acre lot in Venice. The Ellis Act was used and then worked around to remove those units from the housing market. And when a settlement was reached, only 83 of those original units were available to be returned to original tenants at their existing pre-eviction rent. Those units housed a very successful, multicultural, multi-generational, thriving community. Today, it's white, privileged, and exclusive. A one-bedroom now starts at $3,000 a month. A starting LAUSD teacher makes $48,000 a month. Even a couple could not afford to comfortably live at the 30% of income threshold in a one-bedroom apartment in those formerly 795 units. We need help. Thank you for hearing us.
Sylvie Shane, I'm a victim of the Ellis Act for the purposes of converting the Villa Carlotta into a boutique hotel. This is an issue I've become very sensitive to, and so I learned about another conversion that was happening in Hollywood at 1850 Cherokee. There's a gentleman here who will speak, a former Vietnam vet who lived at 1850 Cherokee, who was displaced, along with 18 other residents, two of whom are now homeless. The two that were homeless did not qualify for relocation money because under the municipal code there is a waiver provision. That waiver provision does not have any timelines attached. So some of these people who started their tenancies in 2008 and were displaced in 2013, 5 years later, received no compensation. I ask that you please look at that waiver provision and put caps on it in terms of time because otherwise someone can live somewhere for 10 years thinking that that they're never going to be displaced for whatever new development, and then 10 years later when the markets change dramatically, they find themselves unable to find replacement housing. Thank you.
Thank you. A. McCowan.
Displaced me from 1850 Cherokee after 10 years. I have a whole family staying there. We had 2 apartments, very reasonable. Now, the money that I received, my other 2 kids and wife didn't receive any relocation fee. I only received it because I'm a disabled veteran, and the government office had to get with Josh Weiss and force him to give me the money that I deserved. I was lowballed by him, but they threatened to take his money from Hill to Beach, and made him pay me $18,850, which I turned around and had to pay first and last for my 2 kids and my ex-wife and my son in San Diego. The money was gone in 1 day. Okay, now my VA check goes to those rents because I take care of my family. I will take a job from you. It's politics for me to get a job through the VA. A lot of politics. I just need to go to work now because I have to take care of my kids. My youngest kid is 2 years old. So I would appreciate whatever you can do. Thank you very much for your service. Bye.
Thank you. Antonia Ramirez.
Thank you. I hope that by listening to these 2 veterans, my whole aim is that you will please house these military veterans first and foremost, whether they are active or inactive. They need to be housed now. We cannot wait any longer. A lot of them are feeble, a lot of them are ailing, but they need to be housed. I don't care what color they are. They need to be housed. First and foremost, they are military and they are American citizens. The housing crisis will be solved when you deport all these wetbacks and gangbangers, and Donald Trump will take care of that. And again, this is only a fact. They broke the law. They are felons. They are felons. They have no legal standing as the previous
Suzette Shaw.
Justice Rehnquist said. They have no legal standing in this country.
Walton
Illegal aliens have no legal
Center.
standing. Therefore, no housing. Deportation at full throttle.
Your time is up. Suzette Shaw.
Thank you. Good day. My name is Suzette Shaw. I am a Skid Row resident. I was recently at a community meeting where developers and their team came to do a presentation about a new housing project they were intending to bring into Skid Row. They were very matter-of-fact of initially stating that the upcoming housing was being allocated mainly to people who travel into DTLA to work but cannot afford the high-end lofts. Not only did these individuals not take into consideration how to assist Skid Row homeless and residents seeking housing, Skid Row, which houses the highest homeless population in the United States of America, and all these folks living in poverty, these developers were very matter-of-fact about how they had contacted the local police officials about all the homeless living around this future housing project. Rather than seeing that Skid Row is a community, the people living there, including on the streets, themselves being deserving and of quality housing, rather than seeing these residents as potential neighbors to these potential future residents, they already had deemed them as criminals that they have to police and push out of their own neighborhood. This is the epitome of gentrification and lacking cultural competency and cultural humility. And I'm finding that a lot of renters, a lot of people are, you have developers who are not being held accountable, nor are their property manager teams. They're very capitalistic about how they're looking for renters. Also, I'm finding a lot of these same developers and property managers. I have to say this because it's something that needs to be addressed. I've heard every time I'm looking for housing that they are.
Although I'm sure the committee appreciates these comments, you can find that they are not on topic.
What?
Please wrap up.
I'm sorry?
Please wrap up.
I'm trying to. I just heard all this talking going on. Okay, so I'm finding that they are saying about that monies are being allocated for actually veterans, but what they're doing, they're saying every single time I go out that the money's being allocated for the veterans, they get high monies for veterans, and therefore they don't really have a desire to house anybody else except for veterans because they can get a lot of money for that.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Andre Dubois, Sheila Daroud, and Walton Centerfit.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Council,
for letting me take this time to come up here. I know we're talking about the Ellis Act. And I live at 1334 North Formosa. The property was bought by Belmont Homes, which is the Weissman Group. Earlier this afternoon, we saw a woman here with a small infant who's being evicted. I and my fiance, who is suffering from stage 4 metastasized breast cancer. There is no stage 5, okay? And we got a 120-day notice. Now, I realize that the Ellis Act does help some of us get money to be moved to somewhere else, but $10,300, how do you put a price tag on life? Like all these people behind me and all these people that have come up here, we're all Angelinos from way back in the day. Now I ask you gentlemen, it's real easy for y'all to get in the room and be elected by us. It's what will you do to stay relevant as you hold office for us. So what will be your legacy that you'll leave for us Angelinos here? We're looking for homes. You know what I'm saying? So I encourage you to pick up the phone, call Belmont Homes, the Weissman Group, and stop all these Ellis Act notices. 300 of them, according to what that woman said, that's unheard of.
Hello, my name is Sheila Therod, and I live in the USC neighborhood. I keep watching every day places being torn down and new developments coming up, and all of the tenants, my neighbors, are being displaced by Ellis Act and illegal evictions. Unfortunately, the Ellis Act is not the only problem. The knowledge of just the rent stabilization ordinance. I've lived in my building for 5 years. Not once has there been a sign up that tells the tenants that the rent stabilization ordinance is in effect for that building, and that building needs to follow the LARSO rules. Not once have we been mailed anything in the mail telling us that our building is under LARSO. The housing department, I called them to ask them about why there was no sign up and why we haven't been receiving mailings. Instead of helping me, they directed me to another department. I called that department, I asked them why. They directed me back to the first department. I think it is an urgent need that this council and the housing department make sure that all rent-controlled building tenants know that they're rent-controlled and know their rent-controlled rights. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name's Walt Centerfed, and I'm a displaced Ellis tenant, and I'm also a representative of the Los Angeles Tenants Union, a new but growing citywide organization of tenants associations, activists, individual tenants, and people under threat. Our building was displaced by a new landlord who has admitted that he intends to game the system. He has now replaced us with tenants that he says are not paying rent, if you believe that, until he gets through the minimum 2-year period when the penalties become sustainable as just an ordinary business expense. One of the things that we say about this document, which we congratulate HCID for, it's a good start, but it's only a start. First of all, it's the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't show the full depth of the problem. It doesn't show that it's going to affect everybody's district, even when it hasn't necessarily happened yet. It's lacking on investigation and proof. It's up to us to prove the shenanigans of our landlord. There's not the provision in here to strengthen HCID. We also need to strengthen the penalties, not so much to punish, but to make it against the culture of LA to exploit tenants through using the Ellis Act. We hope and we invite you to use the street smarts, the academic smarts, the legal smarts that we have, and we'll be calling on each of your offices and on HCID to offer that detailed support so that you can expand on this good start into something that we can support.
I have Mr. Greenberg, and then Mr. Bickhart, and then that's it.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm a veteran too, 12 years infantry, military police. This proposal now is frankly the Lawyers Unemployment Relief Act of 2016. It's called the Fifth Amendment. What we have to look at is 30 years ago there were 1,100,000 rental units. There's only 628,000 now. Ask yourself why. We've got to work together not only with tenants, but with landlords. We have to have a system that makes sense. And when you take a look at the rent control, that's one one of the major problems here. There should be a means test, not what it is. In addition to that, relocation fees. When we're talking a bachelor, a single, and we're talking $7,000 to $19,000, it's preposterous. That is not relocation fees, that's equity distribution. This ordinance should not pass for another reason. As of yesterday morning, we were not notified that this would be item number 2. It's the Brown Act. Thank you.
Jim Bickhart, to wrap up.
Yeah, Jim Bickhart, representing Councilmember Paul Koretz. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, happy Renters Day. It's a good day to remember that more than 60% of LA's households are occupied by renters. On behalf of Councilmember Koretz, I'm here to thank the Housing and Community Investment Department for its work on this report. It's our understanding that the committee intends to hold additional hearings before sending recommendations to council, which certainly is procedurally appropriate. However, the council collectively may want to consider looking at Ellis Act action items on a more expedited basis due to the lateness of the date relative to the legislature's calendar. In terms of the report itself, Councilmember Koretz wants to bring several concerns to your attention. Regarding the relocation services discussed on page 9 of the report, Mr. Koretz asked that in addition to providing relocation services to tenants who have signed fee waivers, that the city consider coming up with an approach for sunsetting such waivers after, for example, 3 years if an owner-developer has not undertaken a new project. The longer the process drags on, the more likely that the tenants will face an increasingly difficult and expensive relocation through no fault of their own. As the report notes, the waiver is meant to provide relief to owners in short-term situations, not for years and years. Regarding the replacement unit provisions on page 7, Mr. Koretz supports the one-for-one replacement requirement for RSO units at a minimum. The greater of 1-for-1 or 20% would be preferable. We encourage Housing and Community Investment to be assertive in making sure it has sufficient staff to implement the various labor-intensive recommendations in the report, several of which are included in the section on the further amendment of the RSO. We also urge the various departments to complete a report back on the issues for further review that begin on page 9 in time to be considered for inclusion in this committee's transmittal to council. Several of these come from motions introduced by Mr. Koretz last year. Finally, Mr. Koretz offers a comment on the general context of this report. The report asserts that the city is doing okay with regard to replacing RSO units lost to new development. But as you heard earlier, that certainly is not the case in certain neighborhoods in the city, including the historic Beverly Grove and Fairfax neighborhoods in CD5, in which Mr. Koretz himself lives. There, dozens of buildings containing hundreds of tenants of rent-stabilized units who have few economic options in an expensive rental market have been or are being replaced by expensive new projects. The tenants are being forced out of Los Angeles, and the character of an entire neighborhood is being transformed, not necessarily for the better if we're talking about the fabric of the city. The recommendations in this report will help in some cases, but Koretz would like to suggest that the city needs to consider developing more mechanisms to discourage the removal of existing affordable units in the first place. We could look for ways to incentivize locating new projects on underutilized commercially zoned lots, for example, or vacant lots. And we may have to consider increasing the burden on projects that eliminate existing affordable and RSO units. Councilmember Koretz has a motion regarding housing affordability impact statements pending before this committee that could generate a broader dialogue on this situation, and he encourages you to take it up at your earliest convenience. Thank you.
Thank you. Closing comments? I want to thank all of you who have joined us today. Thank all the groups in the coalition. Congratulations on Renters Day here in LA. I appreciate your work. This is the start of a conversation and a dialogue. We look forward to seeing you in the communities and the districts as we take this conversation throughout the city of Los Angeles. I thank each and every one of you. God bless and stay cool. Bye-bye. Meeting adjourned.